The night sky was a canvas of black, pierced only by faint glimmers of starlight and the blinking lights of the Black Hawk helicopter that hummed steadily above the rugged mountains. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton adjusted her headset and checked the cockpit instruments again. The mission was critical. Extract a high-value intelligence officer held deep in enemy territory before sunrise. The clock was ticking, and every second mattered. Her eyes flicked to the dark silhouette of the SEAL team boarding behind her. Chief Petty Officer Jack Rourke and his squad, silent, lethal, ready for whatever lay ahead. Sarah ran through her checklist, voice calm and precise, a ritual she had repeated countless times. Every switch, every lever, every dial had to be perfect. In the silence of the cockpit, she could hear the faint rustle of equipment behind her, the soft metallic clank of weapons and boots. She had flown countless missions before, but there was something about tonight, the tension in the air, the heaviness of the mountains below, the unknown that made her pulse quicken. The SEALs trusted her implicitly, though they'd never admit it out loud. She wasn't just a pilot. She was their lifeline in the sky. Her training had taught her precision, calculation, and courage. Yet, as she gazed out into the black abyss, she knew that even the best training couldn't prepare anyone for the chaos of war. The helicopter roared over the first ridges, the rotors slicing the night with a rhythmic thrum. Sarah's mind was focused on altitude, speed, and trajectory, constantly calculating safe paths through the jagged peaks. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, a dark maze of rock and shadow. Somewhere in that darkness, the enemy waited. Somewhere in that darkness, their target waited. Halfway through the flight, as the Black Hawk cleared a high ridge, the quiet static of the radio was suddenly interrupted by a shrill electronic scream. Sarah's hands clenched the controls instinctively, heart leaping. On the radar, a warning blinked red. Missile lock, the automated system intoned coldly. Time slowed. Instinct overtook calculation. Sarah's training kicked in. Evasive maneuvers, sharp banking, sudden dives. The mountain peaks blurred past, metal groaning under the stress. Behind her, the SEALs gripped their seats, faces pale, eyes wide. Brace! She shouted into the headset, the single word slicing through the panic. And then it happened. The missile hit with a fiery roar, ripping through the fuselage and sending a violent shockwave through the helicopter. Alarms screamed, glass shattered, and the Black Hawk lurched violently. Sarah fought for control, twisting the helicopter like a marionette in the hands of chaos. Fire spread along the fuselage, smoke choking the cabin. Instruments failed one by one. The ground raced toward them faster than ever. With a final, guttural effort, she managed to stabilize the Black Hawk enough to aim for an open clearing below. The rotors screamed against the wind as the helicopter plummeted, twisting, metal grinding against earth and stone. The crash was inevitable. Impact. The world shattered. Metal buckled, fire roared, smoke blinded, and silence fell. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, only the acrid sting of smoke and the taste of blood. When Sarah's eyes opened, the wreckage surrounded her like a tomb. Flames licked the night sky, painting the mountains in orange and red. Twisted metal pierced the ground like jagged teeth. Groaning and coughing, she pushed herself upright. Pain shot through her body. Her arm burned, her leg throbbed, and her head pounded with the echo of the explosion. She glanced around, searching desperately. The crew, gone, scattered, unresponsive. The SEALs scrambled from the wreckage, checking themselves and each other. Chief Rourke, dust and blood covering his uniform, barked orders, his voice steady despite the chaos. Everyone accounted for? He demanded, scanning the horizon. Sarah raised a trembling hand. Here, alive, she said. Her voice was rough, strained from the smoke and adrenaline. She forced herself to stand fully, ignoring the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. Around them, the night was alive with danger. Enemy patrols would arrive soon, drawn by the flames and the noise. They were stranded deep behind enemy lines. No radios, no GPS, no immediate hope of rescue. Every second counted. Every decision could mean life or death. Rourke's eyes met Sarah's, a silent question passing between them. She nodded. We move, east, away from the crash. No one left behind. The SEALs began organizing, dragging the wounded, salvaging what equipment they could. Sarah's hands shook as she helped, the pilot's training giving way to the soldiers' resolve. She knew her role had changed. She was no longer in the safety of the sky. Now, she was on the ground, among warriors, and she would fight like one of them. As they set off into the darkness, the mountains looming like silent sentinels, Sarah's mind raced. She remembered every crew member, every mission she had flown, every choice she had made. None of it mattered now. There was only the path ahead, treacherous, uncertain, and deadly. But she would not falter. The wind whispered through the ridges, carrying the scent of smoke and the distant, hidden threat. Somewhere out there, the enemy waited. But so did survival. So did courage. So did the unyielding bond between those who fight together. And Lieutenant Commander Sarah, Hawk Dalton, grounded but unbroken, led them forward into the night. Smoke curled like ghostly fingers through the clearing, twisting over shattered rotor blades and smoldering debris. The night was heavy, with the smell of burnt fuel and scorched earth. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton coughed violently, blood streaking her face from a cut on her temple. Her uniform was torn, blackened by fire, and the ground beneath her seemed to shake with the echoes of the explosion. The Black Hawk was gone. The mission was destroyed, and now every step forward was a fight for survival. Chief Petty Officer Jack Rourke moved quickly among the wreckage, his hands steady as he checked the remaining team. The SEALs were alive but shaken, bruised and bleeding, their weapons half buried in debris. 2 of the crew were missing, likely ejected or lost in the flames, and the rest clutched their rifles like lifelines. The silence after the crash was deafening. It wasn't relief they felt. It was the awareness that the enemy would be on them soon. Status. Rourke barked, his voice cutting through the acrid haze. Sarah raised a trembling hand. I'm okay. For now. She winced as pain radiated through her leg, but she forced herself to stand. Her training told her that hesitation could kill, and she refused to let fear take hold. Behind her, the SEALs moved to organize, scavenging what gear they could from the wreckage. The first challenge was clear. They had no communication. The radios were fried in the explosion, GPS destroyed, and the dense mountain ridges distorted any remaining signals. They were effectively ghosts behind enemy lines. Every second they lingered was another second the enemy could triangulate their position. Rourke's eyes scanned the darkness. We move east, he commanded. Keep low. Stay quiet. No one left behind. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. Her hands gripped a rifle she had never held before, not in anger, not in defense. She had flown countless missions where she fought from above, commanding the sky. But now, her fight was on the ground, and she was part of the unit. She squared her shoulders, meeting Rourke's gaze. Lead the way, she said. The team moved cautiously, weaving between rock formations, fallen trees, and ravines that dropped sharply into shadowy valleys below. Every crunch of gravel, every snapping twig, sent adrenaline surging. Behind them, the mountains seemed alive, echoing with distant shouts and the hum of patrol vehicles. Sarah's pilot instincts transferred in strange ways. She scanned the terrain, calculated paths, assessed risk points, but now each decision carried the weight of life and death for her comrades. Hours passed, measured by the rhythm of footsteps and the occasional hiss of distant gunfire. Hunger and thirst gnawed at them, but survival instincts kept them moving. Sarah struggled with her injuries, the pain in her leg a constant reminder of their fragility. Yet she pressed on, drawing strength from the determination in the eyes of the men around her. They were warriors trained for this, and she refused to let them down. Night fell again, shrouding the mountains in ink-black darkness. The SEALs made a temporary camp in the shadows of a crumbling cliffside, using what remained of the wreckage to form a crude barricade. Sarah sat with her back against a boulder, closing her eyes for a moment. The images of the crash haunted her, the twisted metal, the flames, the screams. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Every life in the group was hers to protect, whether she was ready or not. Rourke approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "You did good out there," he said, voice low. "I didn't know you had it in you." Sarah looked up at him, a small wry smile breaking through her exhaustion. "I'm learning," she admitted. She lifted her rifle, scanning the darkness. "They won't catch us off guard again?" The first contact came silently. A patrol of enemy soldiers had circled closer than expected. Shadows flitted between boulders, rifles trained on the faint glimmer of the campfire. A single misstep could trigger a firefight. Sarah's pulse raced. Every muscle tensed. She had to act. "Positions," Rourke whispered. The SEALs melted into the shadows, silent as predators. Sarah followed, instinct guiding her movements. She spotted the patrol first, 2 soldiers, armed and scanning the area. Her finger trembled on the trigger, but she steadied herself. Using the skills she had absorbed like a sponge over the past hours, she fired a single, precise shot. The soldier went down silently, and she dragged him into the shadows to conceal the body. The firefight was brief, but brutal. They dispatched the patrol without raising alarms, but the adrenaline left Sarah shaking. She realized fully then that she was no longer just a pilot. She was part of the team, a combatant on equal footing with the SEALs she had once merely flown to support. As dawn approached, they resumed their trek. Exhaustion pulled at every limb, but there was no time to rest. They had to reach higher ground, a vantage point from which they could assess their surroundings and plan the next move. The mountains stretched endlessly, treacherous and unforgiving, yet every step forward was a victory against the chaos that had erupted that night. Along the way, Sarah discovered a latent resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Her mind sharpened, calculating ambush points, potential routes, and enemy patrol patterns. She adapted to the SEALs' rhythm, moving silently, communicating with gestures, predicting threats before they became immediate. In the crucible of survival, she found clarity. The fear, the pain, the loss, they were weapons now, honing her instincts rather than crippling them. By midday, the group had reached a narrow ridge overlooking a river valley. Water flowed below, glinting faintly in the morning sun. It was a place to rest briefly, to gather strength, but danger lurked. The enemy patrolled the valley, and one wrong move could spell disaster. Sarah, though still injured, took the lead, scanning ahead, calculating risks. She had grown into her new role, not just a passenger in survival, but a leader alongside Rourke. When the team paused, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The world had shifted in a matter of hours. She had lost crew members, witnessed destruction, and faced death at the hands of a missile. Yet she had survived. And survival, she realized, was only the beginning. The fight was far from over. Rourke placed a hand on her shoulder, silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were no longer just a pilot and SEALs. They were a unit, forged in fire, bonded by survival, ready to face whatever came next. And somewhere in the distant mountains, the enemy waited, unaware that the woman who once ruled the skies was now hunting alongside the fiercest warriors on the ground. The mountains stretched endlessly, jagged peaks cutting into the pale dawn. The SEAL team moved cautiously, shadows against rock and dirt, every step deliberate, every sound weighed. Lieutenant Commander Sarah, Hawk Dalton, limped slightly but held her head high. She had learned quickly. Stealth and patience were survival. Behind her, the wreckage of the Black Hawk glimmered faintly in the rising sun, a burned reminder of what had been lost and what they could not afford to lose now. Chief Petty Officer Jack Rourke led the group, his eyes scanning the terrain like a hawk, instinct honed by years of missions that blurred the line between life and death. Sarah fell into the rhythm, her senses sharpened, her mind alive with calculation. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a hunter in the shadows, moving with the same precision she had once used to navigate the skies. The terrain was unforgiving. Loose rocks threatened to betray their position, dry brush whispered underfoot, and steep cliffs loomed on either side. Every movement had to be deliberate. The enemy patrolled aggressively, using drones and foot scouts to locate survivors of the crash. Each time a distant hum of a drone reached Sarah's ears, her heart jumped. But she had learned to anticipate, tracking flight paths, estimating speed, and guiding the SEALs to safety. Her hands, once trained only to manipulate controls and levers, now gripped a rifle with a precision born of adrenaline and necessity. Hours bled into one another. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, but the team pressed on. They scavenged small rations and drank from icy mountain streams when possible, taking care to remain silent. Nightfall brought an eerie quiet, broken only by distant howls and the occasional murmur of the wind through the canyon. Sarah's leg throbbed constantly, a sharp reminder of the crash, but she refused to let it slow her down. Each step was an act of defiance, a choice to survive. The team set up brief observation points on ridges, scanning for enemy movement. Sarah watched through binoculars, noting patrol patterns, estimating distances, and marking possible ambush points. She realized her knowledge of flight paths had an unexpected application on the ground, predicting movement, anticipating threats, staying one step ahead of the hunters. For the first time, she felt the unity of the team as more than just a protective bond. It was a shared purpose, a singular drive to survive and complete their mission. By the third day, the strain was evident. Faces were pale, eyes hollow with exhaustion, and yet determination burned in every gaze. The mountains had become a crucible, testing their physical and mental endurance. Sarah, though still recovering from burns and bruises, pressed herself further than she ever thought possible. She had flown through storms, dodged anti-aircraft fire, and survived countless harrowing missions. But nothing had prepared her for this, the slow, relentless grind of survival behind enemy lines, where every shadow could conceal a rifle aimed at your heart. The first contact came unexpectedly. Two enemy scouts, unaware of the small ridge Sarah and the SEALs occupied, patrolled below. Sarah signaled silently to Rourke. Every gesture counted, a tilt of the head, the angle of a hand, directing the team to positions that would give them control of the encounter without exposing themselves. They watched patiently, breathing shallowly, waiting for the perfect moment. When the scouts were directly in line, Rourke's signal was precise. They struck simultaneously, silent, deadly, efficient. Sarah fired a single well-aimed shot that dropped one of the patrolmen without a sound. The second went down under the SEAL's hands before he could react. Sarah felt a thrill, cold and electrifying, mixed with fear and relief. She was part of this team now. She had crossed the line from observer to participant, and there was no turning back. Night fell, and they moved again. Stars glittered above, pale witnesses to the human struggle below. The team navigated narrow passes, sometimes crawling through underbrush to avoid detection. Sarah noticed small changes in the terrain, loose soil, subtle footprints, faint glimmers of light reflecting off enemy equipment. Every detail mattered. One misstep could alert the enemy, lead them straight into an ambush. Her knowledge of terrain mapping from aerial missions became invaluable. She plotted safe routes, guided her companions, and helped avoid traps. During one brief stop, they encountered a precarious cliffside that forced them to descend carefully. One slip could mean a fall of dozens of feet. Sarah led the way, using a rope salvaged from the helicopter wreckage, her hands raw and aching. The SEALs followed, silent, trusting her guidance. At the bottom, they paused beside a cold stream, water running over stones as if indifferent to human struggle. They drank, washed the grime from their faces, and moved on. The hours were long, and morale wavered. But Sarah's determination, her refusal to succumb to fear, became a beacon for the team. Rourke noticed, more than he let on, how she had transformed from a pilot dependent on the skies to a warrior in the shadows. "You're not just surviving," he murmured one night as they crouched in the darkness. "You're leading." Sarah only nodded, knowing that leadership in these conditions was a quiet, often unseen force. By the fifth day, signs of enemy encampments became more frequent. Tracks, discarded equipment, and distant fires hinted at concentrated patrols ahead. The team slowed, moving with caution, using every skill at their disposal to remain undetected. Sarah's knowledge of observation points, line-of-sight calculations, and strategic movement kept them one step ahead. She felt a strange pride in her adaptability. In the crucible of survival, she had found a new way to fly, not through the air, but across the deadly terrain that threatened to swallow them whole. That evening, as they settled briefly in a sheltered canyon, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of her fallen crew, the helicopter destroyed in an instant, and the thin line between life and death that had become her constant companion. But she also recognized the bond forming with the SEALs, a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that they were more than individuals now. They were a unit, forged in fire and chaos, moving together through the shadows, bound by survival and purpose. And somewhere ahead, unseen and waiting, the enemy planned their next move. But Sarah Dalton, grounded and transformed, was no longer a passive target. She had learned the rhythm of survival, the cadence of stealth, the discipline of patience. The mountains would not break her. The enemy would not take her. She would endure. She would fight. And she would lead her team through the darkness, step by step, toward survival. As the night deepened and the wind whispered through the canyons, Sarah's eyes scanned the horizon. Every ridge, every shadow, every subtle movement was a potential threat and a potential opportunity. She was ready for both. And in the distance, the mountains seemed to whisper back, carrying the echoes of a pilot-turned-warrior, of a woman who would not be grounded, and of a team that would not fall. The first rays of dawn painted the valley in pale gold, but the beauty of the mountains was deceptive. The SEAL team crested a ridge and gazed down at the narrow river bend below, a natural choke point and their only route east. The river glimmered cold and swift, bordered by steep cliffs on both sides. The team moved cautiously, every footfall deliberate, every breath measured. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton led for a moment, her eyes scanning the shadows, instincts honed from days of survival, guiding each step. Eyes sharp, Chief Petty Officer Jack Rourke warned. "Something doesn't feel right." Sarah's gut agreed. The bend was too perfect, too obvious. She crouched low, scanning the cliffs with binoculars. Faint movement, shadows flitting along the rocks, barely visible. "Enemy," she whispered. Cliffs, Snipers, probably. And there's more than one. The SEALs spread out, taking positions behind boulders and fallen logs. Rourke signaled with subtle hand gestures, and Sarah followed, slipping into a narrow crevice that offered both cover and a clear line of sight. Her legs ached, her body screamed from exhaustion, but adrenaline sharpened her focus. Every detail mattered: the slope of the cliff, the angle of sunlight on rocks, the rustle of leaves. The enemy opened fire without warning. Bullets cracked through the air, splashing into the river below, kicking up spray. Rocks exploded where shots landed, and the team dove instinctively, rolling behind cover. The ambush was precise, almost surgical. The enemy had predicted their approach. "Return fire. Hold them off," Rourke shouted. Sarah's hands shook slightly, gripping the rifle. Her eyes locked on the first sniper, hidden in the shadows above. She remembered every maneuver she had learned as a pilot: precision, timing, anticipation. The sniper's movements were predictable if watched carefully. She fired, and the first threat went down silently, disappearing behind a jagged boulder. Another sniper emerged, and she fired again. The firefight escalated. Bullets sliced through the air, ricocheting off rocks. Smoke and dust clouded the canyon. The SEALs moved with lethal precision, suppressing enemy fire while repositioning. Sarah felt a strange exhilaration, fear tempered by focus. She was no longer just a pilot. She was part of the hunt, one of the predators rather than prey. The river bend became a deadly arena. Explosions from improvised traps and small grenades rocked the ground. One SEAL was grazed by a bullet, grimacing but pressing forward. Rourke's voice rang out, coordinating movements, guiding the team like a chess master in real time. Sarah followed his lead, scanning, aiming, calculating trajectories, covering angles. Her body moved on instinct now, muscles memorizing every calculated motion. At a critical moment, Sarah spotted an enemy sniper aiming directly at Rourke. Without thinking, she raised her rifle and fired. The sniper collapsed, a single clean shot, saving the life of the SEAL leader she had come to respect as both mentor and comrade. For a heartbeat, she allowed herself a flicker of pride. Then she focused again. The battle was far from over. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. The enemy pressed, retreating and attacking in waves, testing the team's endurance and resolve. Sarah's legs trembled from fatigue, her arms ached, and her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. But she could not stop. Every moment of hesitation could mean death. Every decision mattered. She had learned quickly that survival was not passive. It required courage, precision, and relentless action. Using a salvaged component from the helicopter's electronics, she improvised a signal jammer from the remnants of a small drone that had been destroyed in the crash. With trembling hands, she activated it, and for a brief but crucial 60 seconds, enemy communications and drones went silent. The SEALs exploited the moment, pushing forward, reclaiming higher ground, and forcing the attackers to retreat temporarily. By mid-morning, the enemy had been repelled, but at a cost. The team was exhausted. Dust, blood, and sweat coated their uniforms. One SEAL had been wounded seriously, and 2 more had minor injuries. Sarah's own body was battered, but she refused to stop, refusing to let weakness take hold. She had crossed a threshold. She was no longer afraid of blood or fire or death. She understood them, respected them, and wielded her fear as fuel. Rourke approached, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of return fire. "You did well," he said quietly, almost reverently. "You're not just surviving. You're fighting with us." Sarah exhaled, barely able to speak. "I had to," she said simply. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the crew she had lost in the crash, to the Black Hawk reduced to smoking wreckage. She had promised them she would survive, and she would honor that promise with every breath, every step forward. The river bend behind them was now quiet, deceptively calm. But the team knew it would not stay that way. Enemy reinforcements could arrive at any moment. They had gained ground, yes, but the mountains were still crawling with threats. Sarah's eyes, scanning the ridges and cliffs, caught every movement, every glimmer of light, every shadow. She had learned that the line between predator and prey was razor thin, and in these mountains, survival was the only mission that mattered. As the sun climbed higher, the team pressed forward, moving parallel to the river, keeping to cover and shadows. Every ridge, every canyon, every stone became a potential battlefield. Sarah's mind was a constant calculation of angles, threats, and escape routes. Her body, battered but relentless, followed instinct and training, adapting with every step. She had become more than a pilot. She was a warrior forged in fire and chaos. By nightfall, they had reached a narrow canyon beyond the river bend, a temporary reprieve from the immediate threat. They huddled together, tending to wounds, checking weapons, conserving energy. Sarah sat against a boulder, her hands on her rifle, mind racing through the day's events. The ambush had tested everything: patience, endurance, courage, and ingenuity. She had survived, but she knew the mountains held more danger ahead. Rourke's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of her transformation. "We're not out of this," he said quietly, scanning the darkening canyon. "But you've earned your place with us. Don't forget that." Sarah nodded, exhaustion and adrenaline warring for control over her body. She had survived the ambush, proven her courage, and discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. Yet she also understood the truth. This was only the beginning. The mountains were vast, the enemy persistent, and the path to survival would be long, perilous, and unforgiving. As night fell, the team moved again, shadows slipping through the canyon, silent and precise. Sarah's eyes reflected the moonlight, sharp and alert. She had become something new, no longer a pilot of machines, but a pilot of survival, navigating the treacherous terrain of war itself. And somewhere ahead, the river twisted through the valley like a silver snake, a lifeline and a challenge, promising more danger and more trials. In the quiet between the gunfire and movement, Sarah Dalton realized something profound. The mountains had tested her. The enemy had tried to break her, and yet she stood unbowed. She would continue. She would fight. And she would lead her team through the shadows, step by step, until the sun rose on the other side of this nightmare. The valley stretched before them in the muted light of early morning, rugged cliffs rising like silent sentinels. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton led the SEAL team cautiously, every sense alert. The ambush at the river bend had tested their strength, but survival had taught them patience. Now, a new objective loomed: locate the missing intelligence officer, Agent Monroe, believed to be held in a remote cave deep within the enemy-controlled mountains. Sarah's eyes scanned the jagged ridges, noting patterns of smoke from distant fires, glimmers of light reflecting off metal equipment, and faint tracks in the dust. Her body ached, every muscle screaming after days of relentless movement, yet adrenaline and determination pushed her forward. This was a new mission, no longer simply survival, but rescue. Rourke moved alongside her, offering quiet guidance, his eyes constantly sweeping the horizon. "We're close," he said in a low tone. "I can feel it. Stay sharp." They descended into a narrow canyon, the river winding beneath them like a silver ribbon. Each step required care. Loose rocks and sudden drops were treacherous. The SEALs moved with practiced precision, signals silent, gestures subtle, every motion calculated. Sarah followed instinctively, her piloting skills translated into reconnaissance and terrain navigation. She was no longer just a pilot. She was part of the unit, a warrior in the shadows. The cave came into view as they rounded a bend. Its entrance was jagged, partially obscured by boulders and brush, a natural fortress. But the faint sounds of groaning and movement confirmed the presence of a human inside. Sarah felt a surge of relief, tempered by the awareness that the enemy could be close too. "Move carefully," Rourke whispered. "We don't know what traps they've left." They approached silently, weapons ready, eyes scanning every shadow. Sarah's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation. This was what they had fought for, the chance to save a life, to restore hope amid chaos. Inside, Agent Monroe was slumped against a rock, chains biting into his wrists and ankles, bruises darkening his skin. His breathing was shallow, labored, each movement a reminder of the suffering he had endured. Sarah knelt beside him, her fingers working quickly to release the bonds. "You're safe now," she whispered. "We've got you." Rourke and the SEALs secured the perimeter, while Sarah assessed Monroe's condition. Water, a first aid kit salvaged from the wreckage, and a few rations became their lifeline. The agent's gratitude was quiet but profound, a mix of relief, disbelief, and exhaustion. For Sarah, it was a reminder of why they fought, the lives at stake, the people who depended on their courage and skill. Nearby, remnants of a destroyed American reconnaissance drone offered a glimmer of hope. Among the charred metal and broken circuits, Sarah spotted a transmitter that appeared intact. It was a small device, but it could serve as a distress beacon, a chance to call for extraction. But activating it was risky. The signal could also reveal their position to the enemy. "Beacon," Rourke muttered, studying the device. "It could save us, but it could also get us killed." Sarah studied it carefully, calculating the odds. "We need help," she said firmly. "We can't move Monroe alone. We take the risk." They worked quickly, scavenging wires, rewiring circuits, and improvising shielding from the drone's remains. Every second mattered. The mountains around them were alive with danger, and they had to act fast. Sarah's hands were steady despite exhaustion, guided by experience and resolve. As the transmitter hummed to life, she felt a surge of hope. Hours passed in tense silence. The beacon sent out a weak but detectable signal. The team listened to the distant echoes, aware that enemy patrols could detect it as well. It was a gamble, a slender thread of hope stretched across hostile terrain. And then, in the distance, headlights appeared, moving, fast, precise. Enemy vehicles. They were coming, drawn by the same signal that was their lifeline. Rourke signaled the team to prepare for immediate engagement. Sarah's pulse raced. "We fight them," she said. "We make them earn it." The SEALs nodded, weapons ready, positions taken. The canyon became a deadly arena. Rocks, boulders, and narrow ridges became natural fortifications. The enemy advanced, unaware of the traps and ambushes waiting. The first wave hit like a storm. Bullets ricocheted, dust and debris clouding the air. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of calculation and instinct. Every shot counted, every movement had to be precise. Using the terrain to her advantage, she targeted enemies before they could aim, each action coordinated with the SEALs around her. Improvised traps slowed the attackers, while suppressive fire kept them at bay. The firefight was brutal, testing endurance, courage, and willpower. Sweat and blood mingled with dust and ash, but the team held. For every enemy advancing, there was a counter, a strategy, a defense that stemmed from training, experience, and sheer determination. Sarah realized fully that she was no longer a passenger in war. She was a participant, equal in skill and courage to the men she had once flown above. As the sun climbed higher, the attackers began to falter. The beacon continued to transmit, guiding distant friendly forces to their location. The enemy, recognizing the untenable position, withdrew, leaving the SEALs and their rescued agent battered but unbroken. Sarah collapsed briefly beside Monroe, her body shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. The relief was palpable, but fleeting. They knew that extraction was still uncertain, and the mountains were still alive with hidden threats. Rourke approached, nodding once at Sarah. "Beacon's working. Help is on the way." "You did good." Sarah looked at the horizon, eyes scanning the peaks and valleys. Hope, fragile but real, stretched before them. She thought of her fallen crew, the Black Hawk destroyed in an instant, and the odds they had overcome. Survival had tested them, battle had tempered them, and now the chance for rescue offered the possibility of an end to the nightmare, though not yet. The team took a moment to rest, tending wounds, rationing supplies, and preparing for the final leg of their journey. Sarah sat with her back against a boulder, eyes closed briefly, reflecting on how far they had come. Every member of the team had endured, adapted, and survived. Every challenge had forged a stronger bond between them, and she realized, with quiet certainty, that they would face whatever came next together, unbroken. As dusk approached, distant rotor blades hummed faintly over the mountains, the first sign of potential extraction. The SEALs and Sarah readied themselves, weapons primed, eyes sharp. The beacon was their lifeline, the mountains their crucible, and the enemy still a threat lurking in the shadows. But for the first time since the crash, there was hope on the horizon. And somewhere ahead, the sky promised reinforcements, carrying with it the possibility of survival and the end of a harrowing ordeal. Sarah Dalton knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself a glimmer of optimism. The night fell heavy over Black Ridge, a jagged formation of rock and shadow that loomed above the narrow canyon the team now occupied. The SEALs moved quietly, checking positions and reinforcing makeshift defenses. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton stood beside Chief Petty Officer Jack Rourke, her hands stained with blood and dirt, eyes scanning the cliffs for movement. The enemy had learned their position. The beacon was sending out signals, and reinforcements would be coming. Every second now was measured in risk and survival. "This is it," Rourke whispered. "They'll come at us hard." Sarah nodded, her body aching, her spirit tired but resolute. She had learned quickly over the past days. Survival wasn't passive. It required constant vigilance, sharp instincts, and unyielding courage. The ridge above offered a strategic advantage, but it was a double-edged sword. They were trapped in a natural fortress, easy to defend, but impossible to flee from if the enemy brought sufficient force. The team prepared. Rocks were stacked to create partial cover. Debris from the helicopter wreck was fashioned into barriers, and the faint glow of fires was extinguished to keep them invisible. Sarah adjusted her rifle, checking ammunition, scanning every shadow. She had been trained to fly machines through storms, but now she was piloting survival itself, guiding her team through the treacherous terrain of war. The first assault came just as the moon rose, pale and eerie. Shadows shifted along the ridges above, enemy silhouettes moving with calculated precision. Explosions echoed in the canyon as mortar landed nearby, throwing dust and rock into the air. Bullets cracked against stone, ricocheting unpredictably. Sarah dropped low, firing in short, controlled bursts, her movements precise despite fatigue. The SEALs responded with disciplined efficiency. Suppressive fire, coordinated flanking maneuvers, and improvised traps slowed the enemy advance. One by one, attackers fell, pinned or eliminated by the lethal coordination of the team. Sarah felt a cold thrill, the satisfaction of her training translating into deadly effectiveness. She had once guided lives from above, but now she fought alongside them, fully integrated into the team's rhythm. Hours passed, a relentless storm of fire and steel. The enemy waves kept coming, relentless and calculated, testing endurance and resolve. Sarah's muscles screamed, every movement painful, yet she pressed on. Each shot, each repositioning, each small victory was vital. She realized fully that leadership in this crucible was not about commands alone. It was about presence, courage, and the quiet influence that inspired others to endure. During a brief lull, she assessed the situation. The ridge had become a fortress, but the team's ammunition and energy were low. One misstep could be catastrophic. "We hold them here," she said, voice steady, despite exhaustion. "Every second buys us time. Every second keeps Monroe alive. We fight until help arrives." Rourke nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her transformation. "You're right," he said. "Lead when you can. We follow." The next wave of attackers came with greater intensity. Mortar landed closer, explosions shaking the ground, throwing the team off balance. Sarah's rifle cracked repeatedly, bullets finding their marks with precision. She spotted a group attempting to flank the ridge and shouted directions to Rourke, guiding the SEALs to intercept. Improvised traps, rocks tied to rope, small explosive charges from the helicopter wreckage delayed the enemy, turning the terrain into a deadly maze for those who approached. Even wounded, Sarah refused to yield. She moved through smoke and chaos, covering every angle, firing where needed, coordinating with the team through gestures and shouted commands. Her body burned with pain, her mind raced with calculations, but she refused to let fear dominate. The enemy was formidable, trained and ruthless, but the SEALs and Sarah were smarter, faster, and unyielding. By the early hours of morning, the enemy began to falter. Waves were repelled, casualties mounting. The ridge, battered but holding, became a symbol of resistance. Sarah's hands shook from exhaustion, yet her focus never wavered. She realized something profound. Survival was not only physical but mental. Endurance, courage, and the ability to inspire those around her were as deadly as any rifle or trap. In a fleeting moment of calm, Rourke approached her. "We can hold them," he said. "We just need a little more time." Sarah nodded, scanning the dark horizon. "Time," she whispered, "is what we make of it. And we fight until the last second." Hours bled into daylight. Enemy reinforcements continued to probe the ridge, but the team's defense held firm. Sarah's ingenuity, bravery, and relentless determination kept the SEALs coordinated, inspired, and effective. Every action, every decision, every shot counted. She had transformed from a pilot dependent on her helicopter to a warrior commanding her own survival and guiding the team through the hellish siege. By midday, the enemy finally recognized the futility of a frontal assault. Retreating in disarray, they left the ridge in the hands of the exhausted but victorious defenders. The canyon was littered with spent ammunition, debris, and the scars of battle, yet the team stood. Sarah, bloodied, battered, and breathing heavily, allowed herself a brief moment to absorb the triumph. Rourke approached, his expression one of rare respect and admiration. "You've earned your place, Hawk," he said quietly. "Not just with us, but in this fight. You led, you fought, and you survived." Sarah nodded, chest heaving. She thought of the Black Hawk, of her fallen crew, of every step that had brought them here. They were battered, but they were alive. They were together. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the mountains and ridges, rescue forces were moving closer, drawn by the beacons she had helped activate. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, Sarah looked over Black Ridge, now silent but scarred by battle. The SEALs cleaned weapons, tended wounds, and prepared for the next phase. The siege had tested everything: endurance, courage, leadership, And yet they had prevailed. Sarah realized fully that fear and determination were interchangeable, that courage could be learned, and that survival depended not only on skill, but on willpower. The mountains were still alive with danger, the enemy still lurking in shadows. But the team had proven something essential. They could endure. They could fight. And they could survive together. Sarah Dalton, once a pilot dependent on wings, now stood firmly on the ground as a warrior and leader. The mountains had tested her. The enemy had tried to break her, but she was unbroken. The SEALs, once skeptical of the grounded pilot, now recognized her as one of their own. A warrior forged in fire, bonded by battle, and unwavering in courage. And somewhere above, the faint hum of helicopters signaled hope, a promise that the long ordeal was nearing its end. But for now, they held the ridge, alive, defiant, and unyielding. The first light of dawn broke over Black Ridge, painting the jagged peaks in pale gold and casting long shadows across the valley. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton crouched beside Chief Petty Officer Jack Rourke, surveying the ridge they had fought so hard to hold. The enemy was scattered, regrouping, but the SEAL team and the rescued Agent Monroe had survived the night. Now, the next phase of their ordeal loomed: extraction. The faint thrum of helicopter rotors reached their ears, distant at first, almost imperceptible over the wind. Sarah's heart surged with both relief and caution. The rescue helicopters were coming, the very thing she had once been trained to fly, but this time, the threat of enemy fire made the sky a battlefield. Every second counted. Every movement could trigger disaster. Positions, Rourke ordered. Cover the landing zone. Watch the cliffs. Sarah dropped to a lower vantage point, scanning the ridges above and below. The enemy could still strike, and the landing helicopters would be vulnerable. Her hands shook slightly as she raised her rifle, eyes narrowing on potential threats. She had flown countless missions where her role was to protect the SEALs from above. Now, she was protecting them from the ground, using precision, observation, and strategy to ensure that the skies could save them. The first Black Hawk appeared over the ridge, rotors slicing the thin morning air. Its approach was cautious, guided by the beacon Sarah had helped activate days ago. Dust and debris whipped through the air as it descended, the crew unaware of the dangers lurking on the cliffs. Enemy fire cracked out from hidden positions, bullets ricocheting off rocks and plummeting into the canyon. Sarah acted instinctively. She fired controlled bursts, picking off enemy soldiers who threatened the landing zone. Rourke's SEALs joined her, suppressing enemy fire with precision. The helicopters shuddered from close calls, but the team held the ridge, creating a corridor of safety for the extraction. Almost there, Sarah shouted, adrenaline surging. Her body ached from days of relentless movement, burns and bruises, yet every fiber of her being was focused. She was a pivot point between survival and annihilation, guiding both her team and the rescuers through the chaos. The helicopters descended further, rotor wash tearing at the loose rocks and dust of the ridge. The team moved Monroe forward, keeping him low, protected by their own bodies. Every step was calculated, every action measured. The enemy continued to fire, relentless, but the SEALs' coordination and Sarah's marksmanship kept the attackers at bay. One helicopter hovered just above the ground, side doors open, ropes ready. Sarah glanced at Rourke. "We go now," he said, voice tense but calm. They moved as one, Monroe supported by two SEALs, Sarah covering the perimeter with precise, rapid fire. Enemy soldiers attempted to close in, but Sarah anticipated their movements, guiding the team, picking targets, and providing suppressive fire that allowed her companions to move safely. Her mind, once occupied with flight calculations, now calculated trajectories, distances, and cover points, every element crucial for survival. The team reached the first rope ladder. Monroe went up first, supported by the SEALs. Sarah stayed back, covering the movement. Bullets ricocheted off rocks around her, yet she remained focused, calm under pressure. One by one, the team ascended, each member moving with tense precision. Then, an explosion rocked the ridge. A hidden enemy charge detonated near the second helicopter, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Sarah was thrown to the ground, stunned but alive. She shook off the dust, eyes scanning for threats, heart pounding. The enemy attempted to regroup, but the SEALs pressed forward, returning fire, while the helicopters held position, stabilizing in the turbulence caused by the blast. "Go, go, go," Rourke shouted. Sarah saw her chance. Using a combination of suppressive fire and precise positioning, she provided cover for the final group, including herself, to reach the rope ladder. Her arms burned as she pulled herself up, bullets whizzing past, road awash threatening to unbalance her. But each movement was deliberate, each step calculated. She had learned to survive in the sky and on the ground. Now she applied every lesson simultaneously. Finally, she was aboard the hovering Black Hawk, hoisted into the cabin alongside the last SEALs and Monroe. The helicopter surged upward, rotors slicing the air, carrying them away from the ridge and the enemy below. Sarah slumped against the interior wall, exhausted but alive. Around her, the SEALs breathed heavily, bruised and battered, but triumphant. Monroe, still pale and weak, looked at her with gratitude he could not fully express. The enemy fired one last barrage, mortar landing near the ridge, but the Black Hawk moved with precision, evading the explosions. Sarah's relief was tempered by the knowledge that the battle was not over. Extraction was always dangerous, and the mountains could not be underestimated. But for now, they were safe. The helicopter climbed higher, leaving Black Ridge behind. Sarah looked out at the mountains, jagged peaks fading into the distance. She reflected on the journey, the crash, the ambushes, the relentless pursuit, and the siege, and realized she had changed fundamentally. She was no longer a pilot who depended on wings. She was a warrior forged in fire, capable of fighting with courage, strategy, and resilience alongside the SEALs she had once protected from above. Rourke, sitting beside her, gave a faint nod. "You did more than survive," he said quietly. "You led. You fought. You saved lives. I don't know how we make it through half the missions without you next time." Sarah allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. "We made it," she said softly, looking at Monroe, then the SEALs, then out at the mountains below. "That's what matters." As the helicopter sped toward safety, the mountains receding below, Sarah Dalton realized the full scope of what they had endured. They had survived impossible odds, adapted, fought relentlessly, and emerged together. The world below was still dangerous, but for the first time in days, there was hope, real, tangible hope, carried on the blades of the helicopter above. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun rose fully, illuminating the valley below, a symbol that even in the darkest trials, courage, resilience, and unity could prevail. The Black Hawk sliced through the morning sky, carrying Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawk Dalton, the SEAL team, and the rescued Agent Monroe away from the jagged mountains that had been both their crucible and their battlefield. The rotors thumped steadily, a heartbeat against the chaos of the past days. Below, Black Ridge receded into the distance, scarred by fire and blood, yet standing as a testament to endurance, strategy, and courage. Sarah slumped against the side of the helicopter, bruised, bloodied, and exhausted. Every muscle ached, her body screaming in protest, yet her mind was sharper than ever. She reflected on the ordeal, the crash that had turned her world upside down, the ambush at the river bend, the siege at Black Ridge, and the relentless pursuit of survival. Every moment had tested her physically, mentally, and emotionally. Every decision had carried the weight of life and death. And she had survived. Monroe, pale and weak, rested on a stretcher beside her. His gratitude was silent but profound, eyes flicking toward Sarah with a mixture of relief, respect, and disbelief. I don't know how to thank you," he whispered, voice hoarse. Sarah shook her head, managing a small, tired smile. "No thanks needed," she replied softly. "You're alive. That's enough." Rourke, seated opposite her, gave a rare, approving nod. "You've done more than survive, Hawk. You've led, fought, and inspired. Don't underestimate what that means." The helicopter banked gently, approaching the forward operating base. Smoke rose in the distance from controlled burns and clearing operations, the first signs of civilization after days of isolation in hostile terrain. Rescue teams on the ground moved to meet them, coordinating medics and security. Sarah's heart lifted with relief, tempered by the sobering knowledge of what had been lost. Crew members, allies, and the innocence of assuming any mission was predictable or safe. As the aircraft touched down, dust and debris kicked up around the landing zone. Sarah and the SEALs assisted Monroe out of the helicopter, supporting him to the waiting medical team. She glanced back at the ridge, now distant and quiet, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. The mountains had been merciless, but they had forged courage, resilience, and leadership in ways she could never have imagined. The team was debriefed inside a secure facility. Medical personnel treated wounds, administered fluids, and assessed injuries. Sarah's burns and bruises were cleaned and bandaged, yet she refused to sit idle, assisting in checking gear and ensuring all evidence of enemy equipment was documented for intelligence purposes. She had learned that responsibility never ended. Survival was only the beginning. Rourke approached her again, quiet now, respect evident in his eyes. "You've changed, Hawk. You've earned your place with us. Not as a pilot, not as support, but as one of us." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of those words. It was more than acknowledgement. It was validation. She had crossed a threshold from observer to active participant, from protector to leader. The experience had stripped away fear, honed instincts, and instilled a quiet confidence she had never possessed before. She was not merely surviving the battlefield. She was mastering it. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Sarah sat quietly on a bench overlooking the distant mountains. Monroe had been transported to a secure location. The SEALs were resting and debriefing, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly breathe. Memories of the crash, the ambush, and the siege coursed through her mind. Fear, pain, loss, and courage intertwined. She had faced the impossible and emerged not just alive, but stronger, more focused, and unshakable. Her thoughts drifted to the crew of the Black Hawk, the lives lost in an instant, and the bond she still felt with them. She had promised herself she would survive for them, and she had. But survival carried a cost, scars that would never fully fade, memories that would haunt her dreams, and the knowledge that courage demanded sacrifice. Rourke joined her quietly, offering a thermos of coffee. "You know," he said, voice low, "not everyone can do what you did. Most people wouldn't even survive the first day. You've proven something rare out there. You've proven yourself." Sarah took the thermos, nodding, staring at the mountains beyond. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "The SEALs, they carried me as much as I carried them. And we carried each other through every step." Rourke smiled faintly. "That's the truth of it. That's what makes warriors, Hawk. The trust, the bond. You earned that bond. It's permanent." As night fell over the base, Sarah reflected on the journey. The mountains had been merciless, but they had revealed her inner strength, courage, and adaptability. She had transitioned from pilot to warrior, from passenger to leader, from fear to resilience. The sky she once dominated had forced her to the ground, yet she had learned to command survival itself. The final report of the mission listed success, bravery, and minimal casualties among the surviving team members. Yet Sarah knew that the numbers told only a fraction of the story. The true measure of survival was not merely in statistics, but in endurance, courage, and the bonds forged in adversity. In the days that followed, the SEALs returned to their missions, and Sarah underwent recovery, both physically and mentally. She carried the scars of battle, burns, bruises, and the invisible weight of experience. But she also carried knowledge, resilience, and a quiet confidence that she would never lose. She had survived the impossible, led under fire, and witnessed firsthand the strength of human will in the most extreme conditions. One evening, sitting quietly in the mess hall, she looked around at the familiar faces, the SEALs, medics, and support staff, and realized that her world had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a warrior. She had faced death in its most immediate form, and emerged not broken, but unshakable. As the stars appeared over the base, Sarah's gaze lifted skyward. She thought of the mountains, the ridge, the river bend, and the endless trials that had tested every part of her. She thought of the crew she could not save, and the lives she had preserved. And she understood, with quiet certainty, that survival was not merely an act of chance. It was the culmination of courage, skill, leadership, and the bonds forged under fire. Somewhere in the distance, helicopters hummed faintly, preparing for new missions. The world continued, indifferent yet demanding, and Sarah Dalton was ready. The mountains had tested her, the enemy had tried to break her, and the Black Hawk's crash had forced her to the ground. Yet she had risen, stronger, sharper, and unyielding. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a survivor, a leader, and a warrior. And in that moment, as the base settled into quiet night, Sarah Dalton allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. She had faced the impossible, endured relentless danger, and emerged alive. The sky had tested her, the mountains had tested her, and the battlefield had tested her. She had survived. She had led. And the world would never forget the woman who refused to fall, the pilot who learned to fight without wings, and the warrior who carried her team through fire and shadow to the promise of safety.